All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out and being here today. I have too many things. So first, I want to say thank you to Dr. Bates for introducing me. Let me make sure I can change my slides here. So I want to say thank you to the Office of Inclusive Excellence for providing snacks, which is all, I'm always about bribing people to come out and hear me talk, so that's wonderful. And obviously to the Percy Wooten University Research Center, I think they've really brought a lot to our campus and enriched the kind of intellectual climate here. So I'm very grateful that you all sponsor these kinds of talks. So this is probably not a great way to introduce, but I want to tell you that Dr. Bates assured me that works in progress and in sort of exploratory works were fine for this talk. And so I'm going to tell you that I don't work on 21st century literature. I don't work on 20th century literature. I don't work on American literature at all. And I don't work in film. So, and I'm horror. So all of that is sort of undermining, but I'll tell you why I chose this, and there are lots of reasons. So like many things that I love, it all goes back to the students. So in 2019, in Westover, I was like, I'm going to start a book club, and everyone kind of laughed at me. They're like, for students, you know. So I said, I'm going to start a book club. The Haunting of Hill House series had just come out the year before, and I said, we'll read The Haunting of Hill House. It was October. We'll read The Haunting of Hill House, and then we'll watch the series together. And it restored my faith in humanity, how many of these students came and read on purpose, and also how many of these students are from very different majors. So we have some biomeds, some nursing folks, history, English. So we had a really good mix of folks who came out to this. And the thing about this is then they wouldn't let me stop. And so every year, we kept reading books after Haunting of Hill House. Every year, we would sort of restart with another horror text. So I'll show you. We met online during COVID. We met outside when we were back from COVID, and this is us reading The Turn of the Screw, which Mike Flanagan has also turned into a series, The Haunting of Bly Manor on Netflix. So we just kept going, and I actually still meet now. This was 2020, and I still meet now with 3 alumni and read books with them. We stick with the horror genre, and one of them was an accounting major, one was poli-sci, and one was English. So it's just so rewarding to get to connect with students through literature. And so I really wanted to, I started thinking about writing about The Haunting of Hill House way back then because it was so positive for my students. Unfortunately, if they see the series first, they're like, this novel isn't what I thought it was going to be. So it's a little slower than the series, and I think in a good way. So what I'm doing today is comparing 2 texts, and I'm doing my very best to try to keep them separate because they have the same name. So I'll be calling Jackson's like Jackson's or the novel, and Flanagan's or the series. I'll try to do my best to keep those separated for you all because it can be confusing. So first up, we have Shirley Jackson's novel, the source of this. A lot of people know Shirley Jackson through her short story, The Lottery. And so The Haunting of Hill House, she has another novel called We've Always Lived in the Castle. She's very, very terrifying. She can be very, very terrifying. She loves horror, very wry and sarcastic and satirical. And so she's really amazing to read. So in the novel, in case you haven't read it or haven't read it in a while, Eleanor's mother, our main character, her mother has just died, and Eleanor's been taking care of her and feels sort of lost. Like, what is her purpose in life now that her mother is gone? She's very much a loner. So she responds to a call or a letter from Dr. Montague, it's 1959, who asks her and another woman to come to Hill House because they are rumored to have like this connection to the supernatural. And so he wants them to come so that he can research using their abilities. We also have Luke in their party, and he's just a descendant of the people who own it, who own the house, just to kind of keep an eye on everyone. I'll talk about Jackson's view of men in a second, but the way, if I can remember it correctly, the way that Luke is introduced in the novel was Luke Crane was a thief, period. He was also a liar, period. That's the whole thing. So that's Luke. He's just kind of a doofus who hangs out with them. So everyone there encounters ghosts in the novel, but Eleanor is really affected by the house, which kind of infects her and speaks to her in her dead mother's voice. And she starts to think, this is my home, and this is my family. And she gets really confused because she's so lonely up to that point. So the other folks in the house decide that it's affecting her too deeply. They pack up her stuff and say, get out, right? Like, we don't want you here anymore. This is not good for you. And so in this last weird moment of self-control, she says, oh, I know how to stay here forever. And she drives her car into a tree. And that's the end of the novel. And so at the last minute, she thinks, what am I doing? Why did I do this? And that's the end. And that mirrors what's happened to a woman who lived in the house after it was originally built. So that's the novel. It's a slow burn. It's really creepy and it's really lovely. Then we get 10 episodes of jump scares from Mike Flanagan, who has picked up this novel for his series. And I do like the series. I don't want to suggest that I don't. So we have a much bigger cast in Flanagan's series, and I'll show you who they are. So we have the parents who are here together, Hugh and Olivia Crane. If you see, I'm horrible at remembering actor names, but Hugh Crane is actually the kid who played the little boy in E.T. So if he looks familiar, yeah, that's where he comes from. So those are the two children, or the two parents, Hugh and Olivia Crane. And they have their children, Theodora, who is named from the book, Stephen, who comes out of nowhere, Eleanor, who's the same as the same name as the person in the book, also known as Nell or Nellie, her twin Luke, and Shirley. So they moved to Hill House to renovate it and flip it. Like in the original Hill House, everyone here sees the ghosts, but the house infects the mother, Olivia, and convinces her that she should kill her children to keep them with her. So, and this is pretty common in the horror genre. So this ghost comes to her and says, we love our children so much, the only way to protect them from this world is kind of to remove them from it. And so she convinces her to try to kill her children. Before she can succeed in that, Hugh, her husband, rushes the kids away in the middle of the night. Olivia dies in the house. The children become estranged from their father. They blame him for what happened because they don't really understand what happened. And the house eventually lures Nell back there to her own death. And the family reconvenes after a long time apart at Nell's funeral. So that's the background of the text. Hopefully that's enough to keep us going through this. The title of the talk is This Wasn't in the Blueprints, Conjuring the Paternal and Mike Flanagan's The Haunting of Hill House. And so the blueprint references this father-son relationship that doesn't exist at all in Jackson's text. Shirley Jackson writes about pairs of women. That's just what she does. Like, she really focuses on female friendship. It's a quote from the series. Hugh Crane doesn't believe there's a basement in the house, despite the fact that his son was like, I've been in it, because it's not in the blueprints. And he's like, it must not exist if it's not in the blueprints. And I also think I like for that to be a reference to the blueprints of fatherhood, and how we read those blueprints and how they kind of shift the way the ones in the book do, or the series rather, do as well. All right. That's the introduction, so let's go. All right, so in The Haunting of Hill House, Mike Flanagan's take on Hugh and Olivia Crane sets up a balance in the parenting relationship that was distinctly lacking in Shirley Jackson's own world as well as in her fiction. And all of Jackson's autobiographical writings on motherhood, she has one book called, a collection of essays about motherhood called Raising Demons, and one called Life Among the Savages, so you can get kind of what her kind of wry humor is. In all of Jackson's autobiographical writings on motherhood, wry reminders of the inequities inherent in the nuclear family underpin her otherwise lighthearted and amusing vignettes. She's kind of deadly when she goes for you after telling this really funny story. It's striking that from Jackson's novel, void as it is of any positive male characters and of any fathers at all, the only father we really get is the deceased Hugh Crane, who is only kind of represented in the novel by this really awful conduct book that he's left for his daughter. But Flanagan creates a narrative which centers the relationship between a father and his children, and which focuses specifically on healing the relationship between a father and his oldest son. Where Jackson leaves Eleanor to find her way alone to and through Hill House, Flanagan's series provides exactly the family that Eleanor was missing. Of course, Flanagan's Eleanor fares no better than her predecessor as a result. Indeed, the series enacts an additional erasure upon her. So the series kills her off in the very first episode and then uses her trauma as a lens through which to view all the other relationships. So she's just kind of this tool. And so, especially between the father and son, she comes back from the dead to fix these relationships. That's how active she is in this. And even the mother, who has died earlier, comes back from the dead and kind of hangs out with the dad some more. And so you'll see her kind of telling him how to talk to the children. And in one scene, she helps him pick out a tie for their daughter's wedding. To which I say, if that's the afterlife, no thanks. I'm done. I don't need any more of that. So. Perhaps inevitably, many fans and scholars of Jackson's work find the series at best unsatisfying and at worst insulting to Jackson's literary legacy. Flanagan definitely anticipated this, right? He's no dummy. He said that it, quote, became more of a challenge to try not to infuriate the fans of the book, while knowing that we were walking headfirst into an adaptation that was way more of a riff, end quote. Most notably, Holly Green is appalled at how Jackson's economy of language and chilling, subtle psychological horror are erased in Flanagan's approach, which she sees as a gutting and a looting of the novel. She condemns the series as cheesy, childish, and, quote, a chintzy, over-tweaked joke, end quote. Emily Nussbaum, writing for The New Yorker, calls the series soul dead and starts her article with this sentiment, quote, when I hit play on Netflix's adaptation of The Haunting of Hill House, I didn't expect to end up rooting for the house, end quote. The series did garner plenty of positive reviews, including from Stephen King himself, who famously took to then Twitter to celebrate the adaptation, if a bit hyperbolically, referring to it as, quote, close to a work of genius, end quote. Even more daring, he went on, quote, I think Shirley Jackson would approve, but who knows for sure, end quote. Other critics call the series a bold reimagining and original and soulful, positing that it has, quote, sufficient nods to the novel throughout to keep the staunchest fan happy, end quote. We've just seen that that's not the case, but beyond conversations about the quality of the series or its relationship to the source text, the series itself enjoyed broad popularity, and in conversation with Jackson's Gothic novel can help illuminate shifts in the horror genre. That genre has been so centered on monstrous and consuming mothers that it's become a fairly tired trope. The mother house, the all-consuming mother, the smothering mother, the murdering mother. Historically, culturally, and medically, women's bodies have always been suspicious because they deviate from the male norm. They're weak because they're permeable in ways that men's bodies are prescribed to never be. They take into their bodies sexually, their bodies produce both unclean blood, mother's milk, and precious life itself. The fact that reproduction of the family and the state goes through the body of the mother in the creation of heirs makes that body powerful and terrifying. And there's a long history of cultural fears around misunderstanding of both the female body and the mother's body. So I won't go into that a lot, but in my time period, for example, you saw female midwives taken over by men and male midwives, right? They took over that medical practice because people were really anxious about what happened when all those women were in that birthing room alone. And the number one fear was that someone else's child, another man's child, was going to be kind of smuggled in, and the father would be tricked, and his name and his legacy would be passed down to basically a bastard child. And so one 18th century sort of, I don't know what's it called, a grumpy commentator says, you know, the women are in this room talking petty treason. And so there was a lot of fear around this space. So male midwives, before they took over, they started making midwives testify in court that before they would help the mother in labor, they made her give up the name of the father, right? So that she would have to sort of be honest. And then male midwives took over so that they were there to police what happens in the birthing room, and they could give public lectures on midwifery that men could go to, and so they could feel more sort of involved in this. You might know there's another little strange, more pernicious kind of thing where they really believe that through the 17th century, although like most cultural beliefs, it doesn't just cut off, so people believed it for a while, that a pregnant woman, whatever she sort of craved or wanted, would mark the body of her unborn child. So for example, if a woman was craving strawberries when she was pregnant, it might come out with a strawberry birthmark. Of course, it wasn't quite that cute most of the time. So lots of times, there are lots of texts you'll read that's like, when she fantasizes about having sex with an ape, the baby's gonna look like a monkey, you know? So the baby was a way to show all these dark fears and dangers of the female body. Horror as a genre helps us to understand and fantasize about the defeat of those things in our society which feel outside of our control and which we imagine threaten to destroy us. It makes sense then that women, and the mother figure specifically, are central in so much horror fiction. They symbolize deep cultural anxieties, and their permeable bodies are perfect hosts for the supernatural. Fathers, on the other hand, are more often portrayed in horror as either violent, controlling murderers, like maybe The Shining or Amityville Horror, or ineffective, failed protectors of their families. There's some examples of this, but maybe if you've seen Hereditary, you know that Gabrielle Byrne's character just sits there and does nothing until the most interesting thing he does is like go up in flames, right? Like he does nothing to change anything. So they're like one extreme or the other. So in the case of both mothers and fathers, horror presents gendered expectations taken to their grotesque extreme. In this talk, I'm interested in understanding how Flanagan uses horror to explore paternal failures as a result of shifting and arguably destabilizing expectations of fatherhood. Unsurprisingly, a lot of approaches to this novel and to the series focus on the power of the mother figure that literally and figuratively haunts Eleanor in the novel and the entire family in Flanagan's series. What's been mostly unexamined from Flanagan's series is the role of Hugh Crane, who is an exemplar of integrated masculinity and a distinctly 21st century father who is as adept at building and repairing houses as he is at waxing philosophically about his children's bad dreams, calming their fears and protecting them from the horrors of Hill House, which are ultimately one and the same as protecting them from the horrors of a mother gone perverse. Ultimately, the more expansive 21st century role for fathers retains enough of that kind of hard kernel of 1880s and 1950s counterpart to undermine even the caring relationship portrayed in Flanagan's updated version. So the next section is called Not at All a Healthy Work for a Man, the Father as Protector. Every man in Jackson's novel leaves essentially everything to be desired. While a few have humanizing character traits, they're universally selfish. They conduct themselves as if everyone else is just a pawn in their world. From Eleanor's self-righteous brother-in-law, who echoes and reinforces her sister's infantilization of her, to the benignly paternal Dr. Montague, who summons her to the house, we see the gamut of male downfalls, extreme control, condescension, objectification, and dismissal. So just to muddy the waters, I'm going to introduce a third text, which is a 1963 version of the book in film, so that we can kind of see some of the characters. There's also a 1999 version, which is apparently horrible, so I can't wait. So I haven't watched that one yet. I'm saving it for a very special day. The novel has a type of surrogate father figure in Dr. Montague, who treats the research subjects like children. He says, quote, "Ideally, you should know nothing about Hill House. You should be ignorant and receptive." He beamed at them slyly. "You are 3 willful, spoiled children who are prepared to nag me for your bedtime story," end quote. Though essentially he's using both of these women who have connections to this invisible world that he can't access to advance his own career, Dr. Montague is more buffoonish than he is threatening. And like many horror father figures, he fails to protect his stand-in children from the very threats he has exposed them to. A much more interesting father figure. No? A much more interesting father figure. Okay, there's Dr. Montague. This is the father figure. Okay, so also from the same film, my bad. The only actual father in the novel is far more sinister than just the unself-aware Dr. Montague. Jackson's Hugh Crane, who built Hill House, which Jackson tells us in the first paragraph is not sane. Hugh Crane in the novel, long deceased, uses the physical world to control and embody spirits that will consume girls and women who come through Hill House's doors. His control of and legacy in the physical world, represented by his deeply unnerving house, is intentionally manipulative and disorienting. Dr. Montague says, quote, "Every angle is slightly wrong. Hugh Crane must have detested other people and their sensible, squared-away houses because he made his house to suit his mind." And he goes on to say, "Of course, the result of all these tiny aberrations of measurement adds up to a fairly large distortion in the house as a whole," end quote. Because Hugh Crane has rejected the neat and expected angles of the physical world, he can embody his own madness and perversity in Hill House, which then infects those who enter the monstrous structure he's created. Dr. Montague feels the confusing pull of the house that begins with the structure itself. Quote, "It is," and his voice was saddened, "a masterpiece of architectural misdirection," end quote. In addition to the house, which is characterized as mad, we gain access to the skewed and sadistic psyche of the novel's long-dead monstrous father through the conduct book he created for his daughter. Cobbled together from existing books, it appears to the guests of the house to be a type of scrapbook, bearing the hand-lettered inscription, quote, "Memories for Sophia Ann Lester Crane, a legacy for education and enlightenment during her lifetime from her affectionate and doting father, Hugh Desmond Lester Crane, 21st of June, 1881, end quote. And the reason he leaves this book is just he's out. He's heading out. He's going to go tour the world with his second wife, but he wants to be both absent and controlling. So he leaves this book for her as before he leaves her, basically forever. The entirety of the book consists of a range of shocking and explicit references to the sins that will send her to hell, and is filled with terrifying illustrations of what happens to those who burn there. To more deeply illustrate the excruciating nature of hell, Hugh Crane has burned the corner of one page of his book, explaining it thusly. This is a long quote because you cannot paraphrase this stuff. It's wacky. Quote, "Daughter, could you but hear for a moment the agony, the screaming, the dreadful crying out and repentance of those poor souls condemned to everlasting flame? Could thine eyes be seared but for an instant with the red glare of wasteland, burning always? Alas, wretched beings in undying pain, daughter, your father has this minute touched the corner of his face to his candle and seen the frail paper shrivel and curl in the flame. Consider, daughter, that the heat of this candle is to the everlasting fires of hell as a grain of sand to the reaching desert. And as this paper burns in its slight flame, so shall your soul burn forever, and a fire 1,000-fold more keen." Men are dramatic, you know what I'm saying? End quote. So the book lingers over shocking and grotesque illustrations of the 7 deadly sins, which even the adults gathered in the house can scarcely look at. Eleanor remarks that Crane's daughter must have been quite young when he left home, leaving this book to educate her in his stead. Eleanor wonders if he ever read it to her himself, and Theodora replies, quote, "I'm sure he did," leaning over her cradle and spitting out the words so that they would take root in her little mind. "Hugh Crane," Theodora said, "you were a dirty old man, and you made a dirty old house, and if you could still hear me from anywhere, I would like to tell you to your face that I genuinely hope you will spend eternity in that foul, horrible picture and never stop burning for a minute," end quote. Rooting these ideas in his infant daughter's mind is still not enough for Jackson's controlling Hugh Crane. He ends with an unsurprisingly dramatic flourish by signing the book in his own blood. And here's what he writes, quote, "Daughter, sacred pacts are signed in blood, and I have here taken from my own wrist that vital fluid with which I bind you. Thy ever-loving Father, in this world and the next, author of thy being and guardian of thy virtue, in meekest love, Hugh Crane," end quote. So I think this is an interesting moment because he has now this leaky body, right? Like he's opened his wrist to sort of share this blood to bind with his daughter. So unlike the horror mother house trope in Jackson's novel, the source of corruption and rot is the father himself, and the skewed house he has built in which his daughter dies a miserable death. The cruelty of his character is built into the bones of his house and reinforced graphically in his rules for his daughter, though he conceives of himself as an affectionate, doting, and meek. Dr. Montague calls Hugh Crane's book, quote, "not healthy, not at all a healthy work for a man," end quote. So this is not to say that Jackson thought all men were like this, right? But this is her example of this kind of terrifying father. Hugh Crane is a successful terrifying father because he masters both the psychological control of his daughter and the physical environment in which she lives. He positions himself as the embodiment of the idealized paternal protector of both his daughter physically as well as of her eternal soul. Some critics of Flanagan's series have pointed out this paternal inheritance. One critic, for example, argues that, quote, "the house collects feminine energies to maintain its power through the entity's continued victimization post-mortem. As a symbolically patriarchal structure, Hill House represents the omnipotence of unchecked male psychic energy, oppressing female entities for its pleasure and survival," end quote. I don't necessarily agree. I think the paternal source of the house is mostly hidden in Flanagan's series, especially when compared to the focus on Olivia Crane as a threat to the family. So if you've seen shots from this series, you've seen her in this flowing dress looking very sort of otherworldly and kind of threatening and dark. And this paternal source of evil would be especially easy to miss for viewers who never read Jackson's text. The series nods to this paternal inheritance obliquely when Hugh unearths William Hill during basement renovations. It is from his walled-up grave that the mold permeating the house emanates. Now we get to see her. But his wife, mad and potentially murderous Mother Poppy, acts as the house's voice, warning about the risk of letting your children go out into the world without your protection, and the house's grip on Olivia reinforces how it preys on and through the maternal specifically. Flanagan's Hill House is being renovated in an equal partnership between husband and wife. Olivia Crane, the architect poring over blueprints, and her beloved husband, who takes the lead on all renovations that his wife plans. Ultimately, then, it's Hugh Crane's role to take the visions created by his wife and render them to brick and mortar. Though the series links itself directly to Jackson's by quoting her text at the beginning, quote, "within, walls continued upright, bricks met neatly, floors were firm, and doors were sensibly shut," end quote, the inhabitants of Flanagan's Hill House are markedly different from the novel's version of Hill House's architect and visitors. In Flanagan's series, we are introduced to the children of the Crane family in the first episode, specifically through their father's interactions with them and helping to calm their nightmares, laying the groundwork for the centrality of the father-child relationship to the series. This father can accurately be described as affectionate and doting, unlike Jackson's Hugh Crane, who assigns his qualities to himself. While familial expectations dictate that emotional labor generally falls to mothers, the parity in the Crane marriage allows them to share these nurturing responsibilities with equal acumen. So here they are comforting their daughter and son. Indeed, Hugh Crane displays a command of empathetic responses to his children, first listening and understanding their fears from their perspective before attempting to calm them and show them that their fears are unfounded. His responses to Nellie in this first scene show us that it isn't unusual for him to respond to her nightmares in the middle of the night. "Her again?" he asks with concern when he hears that the source of Nellie's terror was the bent neck lady. He then sits down to remind her of the soothing conversations they usually have to chase away her nightmares. His words carry through with Nell to adulthood. She carries this calm insistence that the bent neck lady is just a little spill from her dream life into her waking life, though it's ultimately a source of consternation for adult Nellie since she comes to trust herself and she knows it's much more sinister than a little spill. In fact, the Hugh Crane of the series echoes Dr. Montague from Jackson's novel. The need to quantify, measure, and touch reality is exactly what stops him from understanding it completely. Dr. Montague endures mockery from his academic peers for his interest in the supernatural. So he's brought these women to the house because he wants to write a book that's going to show everybody once and for all that he's been right all along. So he wants to summon and then measure once and for all the evidence of the spirit world. Though he realizes that this might be a doomed mission. Quote, people, the doctor said sadly, are always so anxious to get things out into that open where they can put a name to them, even a meaningless name, so long as it has something of a scientific ring. I will not put a name to what has no name, end quote. Nonetheless, he insists on doing just that, employing laughable instruments to delineate the supernatural occurrences in human terms, and ideally in ways that will make him famous. And you can see in these next quotes Jackson's mockery of him and her sense of humor. He seems unable even to convince himself that such a world can be contained. Quote, notes, he said with relief, as though fixing upon one unshakable solidity in a world of fog. Notes, we will take notes, end quote. When he attempts to measure a cold spot with Luke, Jackson mocks the banality of the approach. Quote, the doctor spent a loving and maddening hour on the floor of the upstairs hall, trying, with chalk and measuring tape, to determine the dimensions of the cold spot. And of course, the house is messing with them. So the cold spot's so cold that they keep dropping their instruments, they can't hold on, they can't measure. And then they put a thermometer in the center of the cold spot, and it, quote, refused to register any change at all, but continued doggedly maintaining that the temperature there was the same as the temperature down the rest of the hall, causing the doctor to fume wildly against the statisticians of Worley Rectory, who had caught an 11-degree drop, end quote. So Worley Rectory is not mentioned anywhere else. This is just making fun of the doctor and how he wants to be who they are. Inevitably, any notes of final measurements fail to capture exactly what makes the spirit world so enticing to the doctor, and he will ultimately fail to redeem himself by measuring that which can't be measured. Similarly, Flanagan's series repeatedly insists on the physicality of the house itself, as we watch Olivia create plans and Hugh undertake renovations. And as in the novel, in the series, it is a reminder of the deception of such firm physical markers in a world infused with and sometimes ruled by spiritual disruptions and sabotage. Hugh can't wrap his head around the basement, which doesn't appear on the blueprints, or the red room, which no key will allow him to enter. As a father, Hugh Crane's affectionate care proves deeply rooted in an insistence on the reliability and primacy of the physical world to unravel his children's fear and anxieties. Hugh is undermined by this insistence as he blocks out or denies otherworldly encroachments to maintain the illusion of his own control. There is always a real, tangible world to which one can refer and insist one's children return. So in essence, his responses to their fears while caring are ultimately all the same. There's a physical explanation. Violet banging on the walls is old pipes. The bent neck lady is a spill from the dream world. Olivia's visions of future horror are dreams. Hugh knows eventually it's the house, but he continues to deny it to protect his children from it, in the process maintaining the illusion of his own control. In fact, his emotional support implicitly depends on the children accepting that their visions or feelings are not the same as reality, and that to earn their father's admiration, they must reject the evidence in front of their own eyes. He forces his reality in place of their own. It's no coincidence that the two children in whom he instills his vision of reality most strongly are the two most at risk of Hill House's spell, Nell and her twin brother, Luke. And no matter what you think about this series, the kids are so cute. The kids who play, no, make it stop. There we go. All right, there's Luke. So for example, after seeing some pretty terrifying stuff in that basement that his dad said wasn't real, a young Luke tells his father, quote, "This house is bad, Dad. It's bad," end quote. He then, as kids will do, gets distracted by his sister carrying a box of some old stuff out for the yard sale, and he sees this bowler hat in it, and he wants the hat. Olivia thinks it's too big for him. She's just going to sell it. But Hugh sees a chance to use this hat as a bargaining chip. He says, quote, "I don't know, he'll grow into it. That is a big boy hat, all right? You want this? Well, you're a big boy now. You know, big boys, they know the difference between what's real and what's imaginary. So what do you say, champ?" And he puts it on his head. Later, Hugh rushes the children away from the house the night of their mother's death. He runs the children to the car, and they drive away, watching through the back window as their mother is in the upstairs window, basically begging for them to come back to her. It's a really heartbreaking, I'm already on that slide. It's a really heartbreaking kind of scene, and he's saving them from her madness and her infection by the house. So Hugh leaves the children at a hotel, races back to Hill House to save their mother, but returns having failed the next morning, covered in her blood. That's what we're looking at here. And he tells this kid that it's pain, which kids aren't done. Without really explaining much of what has happened, she says, "Is Mommy okay?" And he says, "She is now." Before Hugh goes away with the police, he gives young Nell a pocket watch and points to the time on the watch when her Aunt Janet will be there to pick them up. This is the most striking of many unsatisfying moments in both texts, where the physical is a pale stand-in for real understanding and connection. The watch symbolizes our inability to control the world, even with our clearest instruments designed to measure it. Only after Nell's tragic death in the house and Hugh's reunion with his children at her funeral does he grant that there was more than met the eye. He admits then that, quote, the house killed Olivia and Nell. Let's see if I can get it right this time, guys. Hey, all right. So when they all return to Hill House, so they're at Nell's funeral, and the house has lured her twin brother Luke there to kill him as well. So they all go back to Hill House as Olivia is trying to do this to try to save Luke. Hugh Crane says then, quote, I thought I could keep you kids safe if you didn't know, but for 20 years I've been holding the door closed because there are monsters on the other side. Do you understand me, end quote? His failed fatherhood is heartbreaking to the viewer because it's both well-meaning and tragically completely avoidable. Though Flanagan's compassionate Hugh Crane is worlds away from Jackson's cruel and perverse father, he ultimately gives in to a persistent core of masculinity that ultimately undermines his emotional care that he offers his children. His constant refrain, I can fix this, which he repeats in even the most absurd circumstances, such as when he is carrying his dead wife's body, betrays a false bravado that he is increasingly aware of, yet he insistently and stubbornly repeats his mantra in an effort to assure even his adult children that he can keep them safe. There's a really beautiful scene that I won't show you, but when the adult Hugh Crane comes back for Nell's funeral, and he hasn't seen his kids in a very long time. And so he walks in and you just see him looking at the children, you don't see them. And he's just kind of overwhelmed with kind of love and affection and sadness. And when the camera pans around, the children aren't adults, they're children. They're the child actors. And it's just such a beautiful and horrible moment where you realize, like, as parents, we always see our children as in need of our protection and as in need of our comfort. So it's a really beautiful sort of moment. But they have not forgiven him. So Hugh Crane's tenuous relationship with his children, anchored as it is in the physical world that lies just beneath the layer of true care and compassionate love, leaves him outside of the deeply intimate connections between the children and their mother. Hugh may build the house, but Olivia, even beyond the grave, flashes the porch light to call her children home. The red room, which every member of the family except Hugh has gained entrance to, was created by the house and exploited by Olivia before and after her death, and it draws the children in by being exactly what they need and want. As Nell tells her, who did this? As Nell tells her siblings, quote, Mom says that a house is like a body and that every house has eyes and bones and skin and a face. This room is like the heart of the house. No, not a heart, a stomach. It was your dance studio, Theo. It was my toy room. It was a reading room for Mom, a game room for Steve, a family room for Shirley, a tree house. But it was always the red room. It put on different faces so we'd be still and quiet while it digested. I'm like a small creature swallowed whole by a monster, and the monster feels my tiny little movements inside. And that last line is directly from Shirley Jackson. Hugh's relationship with his children lacks that depth of understanding about their wants and needs. The children's connection to each other, to their mother, and to the house leaves Hugh out figuratively as the children blame him for what happened to their mother, and literally as they all share this invisible connection. So when Nell returns to the Hill House in the middle of the night before her death there, her siblings scattered all over the country, each awaken in unison with a terrified realization: Nellie's in the red room. When she arrives at the house and prepares to go in, Nell places her father's gifted pocket watch on the dashboard of the car before entering Hill House. She trades in this kind but ultimately impotent gift for a promised gift from her mother. Once inside, she receives that more meaningful token, not a tool to help her get through the world, to reduce the ambiguity of time to points on a watch, but a powerful reminder of her connection to her twin brother and to her mother's love, the locket that Olivia promised her when she was younger, and it contains a picture of Nell and Luke. Her father's gift shuts down and flattens meaning. 3 on the watch means 3 o'clock, no more, no less. Her mother's gift, on the other hand, proliferates meaning. It's practically useless, a decoration, but laden with importance and symbolism, and a promise kept. The locket in this final scene of Nell's life becomes the noose from which she hangs in Hill House, and a representation of this umbilical cord that still links her to her mother forever. Olivia knows what Hugh refuses to acknowledge until it's too late, as the series expresses in one of the rare moments that it takes language directly from the novel, quote, no live organism can continue to exist sanely under conditions of absolute reality, end quote. In fact, just because I love Jackson, I think it would be beneficial to look at her whole opening paragraph of the novel. Because I think this paragraph contextualizes the attempts and failures to contain or control Hill House in both texts. Quote, no live organism can continue for long to exist sanely under conditions of absolute reality. Even larks and katydids are supposed by some to dream. Hill House, not sane, stood by itself against its hills, holding darkness within. It had stood so for 80 years and might stand for 80 more. Within, walls continued upright, bricks met neatly, floors were firm, and doors were sensibly shut. Silence lay steadily against the wood and stone of Hill House, and whatever walked there walked alone. Like the blueprints of Hill House, which proved unreadable and unreliable, the cultural blueprints of fatherhood seem to progress and change, but ultimately loop back on themselves. Their labyrinthine waterings can disorient even the most dedicated father. Flanagan's Ukraine inhabits an empathetic paternal role which protects his children's unique selves and their sanity, and could not be further from Jackson's Ukraine. Nonetheless, Flanagan's Ukraine centers the residual foundational expectation of the father as fixer, when the spirit world that wants to devour his family is exactly the one that he can't contain in traditional ways. His final act of paternal sacrifice, so in the house, he pushes the children away and he sacrifices himself to his dead wife Olivia, and he goes into the Red Room with her to save his children. So his final act of paternal sacrifice reads as empowered and protective, the ultimate sacrifice of himself in lieu of his children, a way to finally slam shut the door between worlds that he has been trying and failing to hold close for so long. But it's also a capitulation, an acknowledgement that his prior traditional forms of protection have at best failed and at worst endangered the very children he strove so fervently to protect. Thanks.